Hi, this is Elliot Fishman, and welcome to Facebook Live. Just a couple more for the end of the year. I think this is the next to last week of the academic year, right? Next week is June 30th, and we start everything again July 1st. We had our farewell dinner for the fellows last night, which was very nice. We had 12 terrific fellows who will all be making 12 times as much money as I will the coming year. But great fellows, we wish them well. We're going to work them to the bone. They will work to the 30th. Our new fellows start on the 1st. And the cycle starts all over again. This talk is going to be man versus machine. And how I came up with that is I've noticed, and a few of us have noticed, that whenever you see an article on AI, especially when the AI is working really well, whether it's in radiology or dermatology or in pathology or in oncology, it always says man versus machine. And I posted one of these, and a friend of mine, and I won't mention the name, you would know if I mentioned it, said it's interesting that the phrase man against machine, and he was reminded of the saga of John Henry, who raced against the new digging machines. It was man against machine. If you go back, just by show of hands, how many of you know the story of John Henry? And I have to admit, I did not know. I must have forgotten. There's been a lot written. There's songs. Johnny Cash sang a song in the 50s, I found out, about John Henry. There's also a series of Disney movies. One of them was about John Henry. And this was at the time around the Civil War, or a little before perhaps, where they were digging. Man was building the trains, and then all of a sudden came this new fancy digging machine. And John Henry, who was a man of man, a giant, said he could do better. There was no machine that was to replace him. And he ran against the machine, digging and drilling and everything else. And I think he may have been a little bit ahead, or the machine was a little bit ahead. And maybe he won. And then in the end, he died. And perhaps that's where the lesson is. There's always this threat. That's 150 years ago, 200 years ago. There's always this threat of man versus machine. The machines will come up. And I am sure when the guy who invented the wheel, the round thing, remember Sid Caesar says the guy who invented the one wheel wasn't that smart. The guy who put four of them together, that guy was a genius. But I'm sure when the wheel came along, people said, damn, this is really a machine. And I'm sure when the cotton gin came along and could weave rather than having people knitting forever and ever. And when the Xerox machine came along, some of you remember the commercial where it had a monk who was copying the Bible and gave a perfect copy to the head minister. And the guy said, okay, it's a miracle to make me 300 more. And of course, the guy went to the Xerox machine and made 300 more. And wasn't going to be writing it with another 300 monks for the next 30 years. So this man against machine is always a problem, because if you always think about man against machine, and specifically if we think about deep learning as man against machine, I am here to tell you, it may not be this week and this month, or even this year, or even next year, but at the end of the day, the machines are going to win. And as my friend said, it's not really man against machine, or machine against man. It's really, you need to think about things like man uses machine. And if you think about it, the things that have made us most successful in this 20th and 21st century is as things developed, as new technologies came along, from the electricity to the light bulb, to TVs, to cars, and everything in between, to rockets and God knows what. It wasn't us competing with technologies that surely we couldn't compete with. But the truth is, it was technologies that we helped develop. And at the end of the day, the reason we are successful is because we use the technology to our advantage. And think about medicine, think about CT. I remember in the beginning, you would have a professor, going back before, let's say, CT, a patient had pain in their leg, and there'd be the very famous internal medicine guys, very famous, could bang on the person's back and say and figure out, okay, this is where the the nerve, the dermatomes, and all this other stuff you used to learn. This is a T3 lesion or an L2 lesion or an S1 lesion. And they would do all this banging with these hammers on your knee and banging in your elbows and banging everywhere. And they would spend hours and come up with right S2. Maybe they're right, maybe they're wrong, but it was very impressive. Then CT came along, and a first-year medical student would say, oh, yeah, there's a mass at S2. It's eroding the bone. Next case. And all of that technology, all of that knowledge that had been gathered since Hippocrates and before Hippocrates, for thousands of years, that skill set became worthless. So remember the guys walking around, the physicians with those hammers? Now the only thing you do is you're banging a nail here and there, but you're not banging on people's knees or elbows or God knows spine or whatever else you're banging on. Because technology changed everything. Now I remember those people were very unhappy. And you went from being a professor where you were the most amazing person in the world, and now a machine in 2 seconds or 1 second can do better than you could, be more accurate, be more precise, not only see the location, but determine the cause, whether it was a disc or a tumor, whether it was herniated, whether it was infection, whether it was inflammatory. It all changed. And every time, remember, there was something called, none of us really remember it, exploratory laparotomy. Something was wrong, you didn't know what it was, so you opened the patient up. You did surgery looking to find something. Sometimes you found something, sometimes you found nothing. Close the patient up and say, hey, successful, we found nothing. Or sometimes you'd open a patient up, find an abscess, find a tumor, find whatever. Often you couldn't do anything about it, or you made the problem worse, but you were looking. CT came along, there was no more exploratory laparotomy. When you look back at the early articles in Body CT, that's what the articles were. How frequently CT could replace exploratory laparotomy. And yes, you might say the surgeon should have been upset that perhaps their skill sets for finding things was being challenged by a computer that could do things in a matter of seconds. But the fact was, when surgeons embraced CT, they were able to know who to operate on and who not to operate on. They were able to know why they would operate. Is it the kidney, the pancreas, the liver, the small bowel, the aorta, the colon? What is going on? Nobody went into a patient. No one goes into a patient anymore saying, I don't know what I'm going to find. Now, sometimes it's more extensive. Sometimes we don't have a biopsy. We're not sure if it's an angiosarcoma or a neuroendocrine tumor or paraganglioma. I can see we're not specific as to the absolute diagnosis, but that surgeon knows there's a 7-centimeter mass pushing on the IVC, invading the IVC, touching the renal vein, invading the renal vein, renal artery, da-da-da-da-da. They know everything. And it really is not surgeon against machine. It's surgeon with the machine. Surgeons do not operate without a CT scan. When you decide to do pancreatic surgery and try to cure someone, you have your CT scan telling you what you're going to see, what you're going to find, and what you're not going to find. Again, it's not man against machine. It's man using machine to help man. And I think with deep learning, it's going to be exactly the same thing. I saw a quote where someone said, if you're a radiologist who wants to get along without deep learning, you're going to be unemployed. If you're a radiologist who uses deep learning, you will be gainfully employed. And I think that's exactly the case. I think things like deep learning are machines, and they're really smart machines. And I am telling you, every day I read another article where some new development is done, some new NVIDIA chip comes along faster and sharper and smoother and better. Someone writes a new algorithm. Every one of those things is constantly changing. The trick for us is to really embrace that change, figure out how to use that change, how to be in front of the curve and not behind the curve. If you tell me, I'm pretty good at reading CTs, that's how I make my living in doing 3Ds. If you told me the computer could do, when I do cinematic rendering, figure out what the presets should be, that I don't need to play around, and I think I do that really well, and I think I do that better than anybody. And I have the best presets, which I'm not sharing with anybody. So, but if someone came along and developed some software that did the best presets, I wouldn't say, hey, I got my own presets and not using it. I would say, play on. Let me see those presets, and I would try to make it better. You know, you always can do better than the machine alone, almost always, if you know what you're doing and you could use it But I think there's no doubt we would use it. I do not think, nor am I challenged, or nor should you be challenged by technology. I think we need to embrace technology. We need to figure out what's real and what's not real, what can help us versus what can't help us, what's reality and what's hype. And we all know a lot of what you hear is hype. Somebody writes an article, does one case, makes a giant conclusion. That's not what it is. It's when it's integrated into our workflow, changing the process, increasing the sensitivity, specificity, decreasing false positives, increasing true positives and true negatives. That's really where we need to be. And I think the only way to do it really is to make sure you yourself don't get into that idea about man against machine. And every article, and maybe it's the reporters, because if you write an article, man uses machine or man gets along with machine, it doesn't sound that exciting. There's nothing very controversial. It's like man plays with dog, man likes dog. Okay, great. Very exciting. But when you say man versus machine, it builds up that inner conflict, that idea that people are always afraid that the robots are going to come and take us over. Kind of, like all those movies, Escape from New York, or what are those Schwarzenegger movies? I can't think of the name of those crappy movies. But you have these robots that are taking over the world. And perhaps that will happen someday. It didn't happen in Star Wars. You still have all those robots. Then you have the regular people. You have the regular people fighting the robots fighting the regular people. You get my gist. But the point is that if you put yourself in that box where you're putting your future on the line against the machines, against AI, against deep learning, against cinematic rendering, against augmented reality, if you put yourself against everything that is surely coming faster than you can imagine, but it's going to take a while, I think you're going to find yourself in a real predicament, because you're going to find yourself both unhappy and unsuccessful, and maybe it's an exaggeration, and unemployed. I don't think you're going to be unemployed, don't get me wrong, but I think you may not be happily employed. I think one of the things we have great concern about is that you really enjoy what you're doing. I think, if I'm just sitting here looking at this iMac, which we need a new iMac at Rachel's table here, but if I was sitting here and I had two screens next to the screens that were like an F-35 giving me updates about what I was saying, the latest in AI here, and the temperature, and all the things I need to know, making my hair comb, whatever I need to do, I think that I'd be happy to have that. I like more information. I like to have this. I don't worry about information overload. I mean, you can get that if you can go crazy, but I want everything. I want all that information. I want to know what we can do, what we can't do, and how we do it. So I think that maybe that's the message today, and it was a great letter to me. Man uses machine. You should go online, go onto Google and type in John Henry, Man Against Machine. There's a couple of good videos, a couple of good articles, and you could really learn a lot. I think I posted it maybe a couple of weeks ago when I got the article originally and put it on CTSS. And I mentioned none of the radiologists heard of this article, none of the other physicians, but all the computer scientists did. So perhaps it's something computer scientists brought up, it's something maybe they see when they're doing their training. So let's see, we're almost out of time here. And if anyone has any questions, a few people are saying hello in different languages, so I'll just say hello back. I assume that's what everyone's saying. I know John Biachino is on vacation. John's one of our senior super techs, and he asked me to say goodbye to the fellows, and I will do that. Another good year of fellows, and everyone's been very successful. But if anyone has any specific questions on the topic, and the last thing I'll say is that Rachel and I was speaking about topics for next week, and I did have this idea, and we're going to put up a little banner and a little bit reminder after we finish this. I'll remind people in the next couple of days. I thought since it's the end of the academic year, instead of me coming up and picking a title, perhaps you all can write questions, and then I'll answer all the questions. So if you send them to me in advance, I'll Not that I prepare for anything ever, but I'll answer them. And if you don't send them in advance and you want to ask them as we're doing the Facebook Live, I'm happy to do that as well. But perhaps think about some questions that you have, some topics perhaps we haven't addressed or we haven't addressed fully to your satisfaction, whether it's on CT or it's on deep learning or AI or anything else that's appropriate that I potentially can answer something about. We'd be happy to do it. So with that, I guess that's it. If there's no other questions, a few nice comments from people, but if there's no other questions, I think I'll sign off here. And we'll see you next week, and we will post the sign to remind everybody. Again, on CTisus Us, I just uploaded about 100 new teaching file cases. We have new lectures. We're working on some new apps for the App Store. We have this new quiz on Pancreas that should be available within a week or so. We have this new format for doing quizzes, which I think will be very exciting. We'll probably do a number of quizzes. Liver is going to be next. But this one looks really good on pancreatic masses. It's kind of a fun quiz. There's not a lot of text. It's like answer the question, get the answer. If not, you get buzzed or something. You don't get tasered, you just get buzzed. So with that, I'll say have a great week, and we'll see you later.